leave with nothing. Those were the 3 words Richard threw at his wife of 10 years. No settlement, no alimony, not even the car. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought Alex was just a helpless housewife who would crawl back to her parents' trailer park. He had the expensive shark lawyer. She had a public defender. He had the millions. She had barely $10 in her pocket. But Richard made one fatal calculation error. He didn't know who his wife really was, and he certainly didn't expect the man who walked into the courtroom that Tuesday morning, a man whose face was on the cover of Forbes, to call Alex sister. This is the story of the most brutal divorce court takedown in history. The envelope didn't look dangerous. It was thick, creamy, expensive cardstock, sitting innocently next to the untouched plate of lobster risotto. Alex Jenkins stared at it, her heart doing a frantic, confused flutter. "Richard, what is this? Is this for our anniversary?" She looked across the candle-lit table. They were at Le Bernardin in New York, a place Richard had insisted on, despite Alex preferring the quiet Italian place near their brownstone. Richard looked impeccable as always. The bespoke charcoal suit, the Rolex Submariner glinting in the low light, his hair gelled to perfection, but his eyes were cold, dead cold. He took a sip of his wine, a vintage Cabernet he'd spent 20 minutes selecting, and set the glass down with a precise clink. "Open it, Alex," he said. His voice wasn't affectionate. It was the tone he used when firing a junior architect at his firm. Alex's hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. She had bought him a vintage compass, engraved with, "So you can always find your way home." It was wrapped in her purse. Suddenly, it felt heavy, like a stone. She slid a finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside wasn't a card. It wasn't tickets to the Maldives. It was a stack of legal documents. The header, at the top, screamed in bold, black font, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." Alex felt the air leave the room, the chatter of the other diners, the clinking of silverware, the soft jazz. It all turned into a high-pitched ring in her ears. I don't understand," she whispered, looking up at him. "Richard?" Richard leaned back, lacing his fingers together. A small, cruel smile played on his lips. "It's fairly standard, Alex. Irreconcilable differences. Though, if we're being honest, the difference is that I'm successful and you're you." "Me?" Alex choked out. "I've supported you for 10 years. I worked 2 jobs while you finished your master's. I designed the interior of your first 3 buildings for free." "You were a stepping stone," Richard interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "And now I've stepped up. I'm a partner at the firm now, Alex. I need a partner in life who fits the aesthetic, someone with pedigree, someone who doesn't look like she buys her dresses off the rack." Tears pricked her eyes, hot and stinging. "Is there someone else?" Richard checked his watch. "Jessica. She's 24, she's an interior design prodigy, and quite frankly, she understands my vision. She's waiting for me at the hotel." The name hit her like a physical blow. Jessica Vane, his new intern, the one Alex had brought coffee to just last week. "You're leaving me for your intern?" Alex's voice rose, causing a couple at the next table to glance over. "Keep your voice down," Richard hissed, his facade cracking for a second. "And listen to me very carefully. You are going to sign those papers. You are going to agree to the terms." Alex looked down at the paperwork again. She flipped to the separation of assets. Checking account, Richard Jenkins. Savings account, Richard Jenkins. The brownstone, Richard Jenkins. The Hamptons cottage, Richard Jenkins. Vehicles, Richard Jenkins. "There's nothing here for me," Alex said, her voice shaking. You want me to leave with nothing?" "You came with nothing. You leave with nothing," Richard said, taking another sip of wine. "Let's not pretend you're something you're not, Alex. You were a barista when I met you. You have no family money, no connections, no degree. Everything you have is because of me. I'm doing you a favor by not suing you for the clothes on your back." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a check. He slid it across the table. $5,000, he said. "Consider it a severance package. Enough to get a bus ticket back to wherever you came from, and a deposit on a cheap apartment. But if you fight me, Alex, if you try to drag this out, I will bury you. I have Arthur Harrington on retainer. He eats people like you for breakfast. Arthur Harrington. The name sent a chill down her spine. He was known in New York as the Grim Reaper of matrimony. He cost $1,000 an hour. Alex stared at the check. $5,000 for 10 years of her life. For the nights, she stayed up helping him draft blueprints. For the years, she put her own dreams on hold so he could shine. She slowly picked up the check. Richard smirked, thinking he had won. Then, Alex ripped it in half. And then, in half again, she dropped the confetti onto his plate of lobster risotto. I don't want your charity, Richard, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. She stood up. And I'm not signing anything? Richard laughed. It was a dark, ugly sound. Suit yourself. But remember this moment, Alex. Remember when I offered you a lifeboat and you chose to drown? By the time I'm done with you, you'll wish you had taken the $5,000. He signaled the waiter for the check, not even looking at her as she grabbed her purse and walked out of the restaurant into the cold, biting rain of a New York November. 3 weeks later, Alex was realizing that pride, while noble, did not pay the rent. Richard hadn't been bluffing. Within 24 hours of the dinner, he had canceled her credit cards. He had changed the locks on the brownstone. When she tried to access their joint savings account, the one containing the money she had inherited from her grandmother, it showed a balance of 0. He had transferred it all into an offshore trust the day before the anniversary. She was currently staying in a motel in Queens that smelled faintly of mildew and stale cigarettes. The suite was a single room with a flickering neon sign outside that buzzed incessantly. Alex sat on the lumpy mattress, staring at her laptop screen. She was down to her last $300. Mr. O'Malley, Alex said into her phone, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. Please, tell me you have good news. On the other end of the line was frantic typing. Frank O'Malley was a strip mall lawyer she had found on Craigslist. He charged $150 an hour, and even that was breaking her bank. Look, Mrs. Jenkins, Frank sighed, his voice raspy. I filed the motion for emergency spousal support, but Harrington blocked it. He filed a counter motion claiming you were... Well, he's claiming you were embezzling from Richard's firm. Embezzling? Alex screamed. I never took a dime. I worked for free. They have receipts, Alex. Forged, probably, but they look real enough for a judge to pause any payouts until the trial. Harrington is papering me to death. He sent over 3,000 pages of discovery this morning. I'm a one-man show. I can't sift through this without more hours, and that means more money, Alex finished quietly, which I don't have. I'm sorry, kid. Unless you can come up with a 5 to 1,000 retainer by Friday, I gotta withdraw. I can't fight Harrington pro bono. He'll disbar me just for sport. The line clicked. Dead? Alex dropped the phone onto the bed. She walked to the small, dirty window and looked out at the gray street. Richard was winning. He was going to crush her, just like he promised. She imagined him right now, probably in their Hamptons cottage, drinking wine with Jessica, laughing about the naive barista he had discarded. She felt a vibration in her pocket. It was a notification from Instagram, a tagged photo. She opened it. It was from the account of Architectural Digest. Rising star Richard Jenkins and his partner, interior designer Jessica Vane, at the Golden Compass Gala, a power couple for the modern age. The photo showed Richard in a tuxedo, his arm possessively around Jessica, who was wearing a red dress that cost more than Alex's entire wardrobe. But it wasn't the couple that made Alex's breath hitch. It was the necklace Jessica was wearing. It was a vintage sapphire pendant. A very specific sapphire pendant. It wasn't something Richard had bought. It was something Alex had left behind in the brownstone safe. But it wasn't just jewelry. It was an heirloom. Specifically, it was the sterling sapphire. Alex zoomed in on the photo. Yes, there was the tiny chip on the bottom left of the stone from when her great-grandmother had dropped it at a ball in 1928. Richard had given her family heirloom to his mistress. Something inside, Alex snapped. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't fear. It was a cold, hard rage. She walked over to her battered suitcase. She dug past the few clothes she had managed to save, past the old photos, until her hand brushed against the bottom lining of the bag. She felt a small lump. She used a nail file to rip the lining open. Out fell a small, black burner phone. It was old, a model from 10 years ago. It had been turned off for a decade. She had made a promise to herself when she left home at 18. She wanted to live a normal life. She wanted to be loved for Alex, not for the burden of her last name. She wanted to know what it felt like to struggle, to build something real. So she had changed her name, hidden her tracks, and become Alex the barista. She had found Richard. She thought she had found love. "You idiot," she whispered to herself. She found the charger cord wrapped around the phone. She plugged it in. It took 5 agonizing minutes to boot up. When the screen lit up, there was only one number saved in the contacts. The big brother. She stared at the number. Calling this number meant admitting defeat. It meant admitting she had been wrong about Richard, wrong about running away, wrong about everything. It meant returning to a world she hated. But then the image of Jessica, wearing her great-grandmother's sapphire, flashed in her mind. Richard wanted a war? He wanted to talk about pedigree and status? Alex pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. "This line is for emergencies only." A deep, baritone voice answered. It wasn't him. It was security. "Identify yourself." "Tell Alexander," Alex said, her voice trembling but gaining strength with every syllable. Tell him his little sister is done playing hide and seek." There was a silence on the other end. Then, a shuffling sound. "Alex?" The voice was rough, shocked, and familiar. Alexander Sterling, CEO of Sterling Dynamics, a man worth roughly $40 billion, a man known to the business world as the Iron Wall. Alex said, a tear finally escaping. I messed up bad. Where are you?" Alexander didn't ask what happened. He didn't say, "I told you so." His voice instantly shifted into command mode. "I'm in Queens, a motel called the Bluebird. Pack your things," Alexander said. "You have 10 minutes. The chopper is already in the air." "Alex, I need help. My husband, I know who your husband is," Alexander interrupted, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low growl. "I've been tracking him since the day you married him. I respected your wish to be left alone, Alex, but if he has hurt you, he's taking everything, Alex. He's trying to destroy me." "He told you to leave with nothing?" Alexander asked. "Yes. Then we will ensure he gets his wish," Alexander said. "He wants to play the big shot? Fine. We're going to show him what a real shark looks like. Don't worry about the lawyer, Alex. I'm bringing the whole firm." Alex hung up the phone. She looked around the dingy motel room one last time. She picked up the cheap plastic trash can and dumped the clothes she had bought at the thrift store into it. She wouldn't need them where she was going. She walked out the door just as the distinct, rhythmic thumping of helicopter blades began to shake the windows of the motel. The game had just changed. The arrival of a Sikorsky S-76 helicopter in the cracked asphalt parking lot of the Bluebird Motel was an event the neighborhood would talk about for decades. The downwash from the rotors sent trash cans tumbling and whipped up a storm of grit and old candy wrappers. The motel manager, a man named Gary, who usually spent his days watching daytime TV, ran out in his undershirt, screaming about liability until he saw the logo on the tail of the aircraft. It was a silver crest, a lion holding a sphere, the Sterling family crest. Gary stopped screaming. He'd seen that crest on the news, usually attached to skyscrapers or philanthropic hospital wings. The side door of the chopper slid open. 2 men in tactical gear stepped out first, scanning the perimeter with professional disinterest. Then he emerged. Alexander Sterling looked like he had stepped out of a boardroom on Wall Street, yet he moved with the agility of a jungle cat. He wore a navy 3-piece suit that probably cost more than the entire motel. He didn't flinch at the dust or the smell of exhaust. His eyes, sharp and steel gray, Locked onto the door of room 104, Alex stepped out. She was wearing jeans and a gray hoodie, her hair messy, her face pale. She looked small. Alexander didn't care about the dirt. He crossed the distance in 3 long strides. He didn't offer a handshake. He pulled her into a hug so tight it knocked the wind out of her. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair. "I've got you, Alex. You're safe." Alex buried her face in his expensive wool coat, and finally, for the first time since the dinner at Le Bernardin, she broke down. She didn't cry. She sobbed, a guttural, ugly release of 10 years of suppression. 10 years of pretending she didn't come from this world, only to be rejected by the ordinary life she craved. He took the necklace. "Alex," she choked out, "grandmother's sapphire." He gave it to his intern. Alexander pulled back, holding her by the shoulders. His expression darkened, a terrifying shift from brotherly concern to predatory rage. "Get in the chopper," he said softly. "We have work to do." As they lifted off, leaving the Bluebird Motel shrinking below them, Alexander handed her a glass of sparkling water. The interior of the helicopter was hushed leather and polished wood. "I need to know, Alex," Alexander said, settling into the seat opposite her. "Why didn't you call sooner? Why did you let it get this far?" Alex looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline approaching. "Because I wanted to prove I could do it. I wanted to be Alex Jenkins, the architect's wife, not Alex Sterling, the heiress who buys her husband's career. I wanted to be loved for me. And look where that got you," Alexander said, not unkindly, but brutally honest. "He fell in love with a doormat, Alex, not you. You are a Sterling. We build empires. We don't fetch coffee for mediocre men." He tapped a screen on the console. "I've already had my team run a preliminary background check on Richard Jenkins. He's a partner at Weak Firm. He's over-leveraged on 3 properties. He leases his car. He's drowning in debt to keep up appearances. He didn't just leave you for a younger woman, Alex. He left you because he thinks he needs a woman with status to secure his next loan." Alex laughed bitterly. "He told me I didn't fit the aesthetic. He said I came with nothing." Alexander smirked. He's about to find out that nothing is a very relative term. The chopper didn't land at a heliport. It landed on the private roof of the Sterling Tower in Midtown. As Alex stepped out, the wind whipping her hair, she saw a team of people waiting. "Who are they?" she asked. "Your transition team," Alexander said. "Stylists, doctors, nutritionists. You look like hell, Alex. If we are going to war, you need to look like a queen, not a refugee." He walked her to the elevator. "Tonight, you rest. You eat a meal that wasn't bought at a gas station. Tomorrow morning, we meet your legal counsel." "I can't afford a lawyer, Alex." Richard froze everything. Alexander stopped the elevator doors from closing with his hand. He looked at her with intense seriousness. "Alex, you own 15% of Sterling Dynamics in a blind trust I've managed since you ran away. Your current net worth is approximately $600 million. You can afford any lawyer. In fact, you can buy Richard's law firm, fire his lawyer, and turn the building into a cat shelter if you feel like it." Alex stared at him, the numbers spinning in her head. She had lived on a budget for so long, clipping coupons, worrying about the electric bill. $600 million, Alexander finished. "Welcome back to the family." The next morning, the conference room on the 50th floor of Sterling Tower was colder than a freezer. The air conditioning was set to keep people alert. Alex sat at the head of a mahogany table, long enough to land a plane on. She looked different. The stylists had been busy. Her hair was cut into a sharp, chic bob that framed her face. She wore a white power suit that was tailored to within a millimeter of her life. She looked like the CEO she was born to be. To her right sat Alexander. To her left sat a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite, Edward Blackwood. He was 70 years old, bald, and wore round spectacles. He was the most feared divorce attorney on the East Coast. He didn't advertise. You couldn't call him. He only took cases that were referred by the heads of Fortune 500 companies. "So," Blackwood said, his voice dry and raspy, like turning pages of an old book, Let me recap the situation. The husband, Mr. Richard Jenkins, believes you are destitute. He has offered a settlement of $5,000. He has filed motions claiming you have no assets, no income, and no prospects. That's correct, Alex said. Her voice was stronger today. The shock had worn off, replaced by a cold resolve. And he is represented by Arthur Harrington? Blackwood asked. Yes, Richard said. Harrington eats people like me for breakfast. Blackwood chuckled. It was a terrifying sound. Arthur Harrington used to be my paralegal in 1998. He's a bulldog, yes. But he's a bulldog who barks at cars. I am the semi-truck. Blackwood opened a folder. We have a strategic advantage. Mrs. Sterling, I apologize, Mrs. Jenkins. Though I assume you'll be reverting to your maiden name? Eventually, Alex said, but not yet. I want him to hear the name Sterling in the courtroom, not a moment before. Excellent, Alexander interjected. The element of surprise is our primary weapon. Richard thinks he's fighting a skirmish. We are dropping a nuke. Blackwood nodded. I've taken the liberty of freezing the proceedings. I filed a motion this morning to replace your counsel. Harrington will receive a notification that you have retained the Blackwood Group. It will confuse him. He knows my fees start at $50,000 just to open a file. He will assume you've found a benefactor, or perhaps a loan shark. He'll think I'm desperate, Alex said. Let him, Blackwood said. Now, let's discuss the assets. Richard lists the brownstone as his separate property because he paid the down payment? Yes, Alex said. But I paid the mortgage for the first 3 years while he was an intern, from my waitressing tips. Receipts? I kept everything in a shoebox. But he threw it out when he changed the locks. Alexander leaned forward, sliding a tablet across the table. Actually, he didn't. My security team did a sweep of your brownstone's trash last night. We recovered the box. Alex's eyes widened. You broke into the house? We retrieved discarded property from the curb, Alexander corrected with a smile. Perfectly legal. We have the bank statements. We can prove commingling of assets. That brownstone is 50% yours. I don't want the brownstone, Alex said, her voice hard. I hate that house. It's full of his ego. We don't take it because we want it, Alex, Blackwood said gently. We take it because he wants it. In war, you burn the enemy's crops. Blackwood flipped another page. Now, the embezzlement accusation. This is where he made his mistake. By accusing you of financial impropriety, he opened the door for a full forensic audit of his finances to prove lifestyle consistency. He wanted to see if you stole money. Well, we get to see if he stole money. Did he? Alex asked. My forensic accountants have been awake all night, Alexander said. Richard is a partner at a mid-tier architecture firm. He's been skimming off the top of construction budgets for 2 years, kickbacks from contractors. Cheap materials billed as premium. He's not just a cheater, Alex. He's a felon. If this goes to trial, he doesn't just lose his house. He goes to federal prison. The room went silent. Alex felt a pang of something, not sympathy, but pity. Richard had built his entire identity around being the successful one, the provider, the genius, and it was all a house of cards. So we threaten him with jail? Alex asked. No, Blackwood said, closing the folder. We don't threaten, we wait. The court hearing is in 4 days. It's a preliminary hearing for spousal support. Harrington is going to try to humiliate you. He's going to bring up your poverty. He's going to try to get the judge to dismiss your claim for support entirely. Blackwood stood up and walked to the window, overlooking the city. We are going to let him give his opening statement. We are going to let him paint you as the gold-digging, penniless waitress. We are going to let him dig his grave 6 feet deep. He turned back to Alex, his eyes gleaming behind his spectacles. And then, Mrs. Jenkins, you are going to walk in, and Alexander is going to walk in, and I am going to introduce the court to the real Alex Jenkins. What do I need to do? Alex asked. Alexander stood up and buttoned his jacket. You need to go shopping. We're going to buy the outfit you'll wear to his funeral. Figuratively speaking, of course. Meanwhile, at Richard's office, Richard Jenkins was pouring champagne into two flutes. He was sitting on the edge of his mahogany desk, overlooking the skyline, a view that was significantly worse than the one from the Sterling Tower, though he didn't know that. Jessica Vane giggled, twirling the sapphire pendant around her neck. "So, it's over? She's gone?" "Essentially," Richard said, handing her a glass. "Harrington just called. Apparently, she fired her strip mall lawyer. She's probably going to represent herself. It's pathetic, really. She was always a bit." "Simple," Jessica said, taking a sip. "I mean, she dressed like she shopped at Target." "She had no vision," Richard agreed. "She didn't understand what it takes to operate at this level. She was dead weight, Jess. And now, I'm free. The brownstone is ours. The Hamptons house is ours. And once the divorce is finalized, I'm going to make partner senior grade." He kissed Jessica, feeling like the king of the world. "What about the embezzlement claims?" Jessica asked, a flicker of worry in her eyes. "She mentioned she didn't take anything. It's just a legal tactic." Richard waved it off. "Harrington says, we just need to muddy the waters. Make her look bad so the judge doesn't give her a dime. By the time anyone looks closely, she'll be living in a trailer park, and I'll be on the cover of Architectural Digest again." He raised his glass. "To us, and to leaving the past in the trash where it belongs." Little did he know, the trash had just hired the most dangerous man in New York, and the past was currently sitting in a tailored Chanel suit, reviewing his bank statements with a red pen, ready to burn his world to the ground. Tuesday morning at the Manhattan Civil Courthouse was usually a chaotic symphony of crying babies, shouting lawyers, and the squeak of rubber soles on marble floors. But inside courtroom 302, the atmosphere was stiflingly quiet. Richard Jenkins sat at the plaintiff's table, checking his Rolex for the third time in 2 minutes. He looked every inch the aggrieved, successful husband. His suit was pressed, his tie was a somber shade of blue, and his face was arranged in a mask of reluctant sorrow. Beside him, Arthur Harrington was scrolling through his phone, looking bored. Harrington was a man who charged by the minute, and he was currently billing Richard for checking his fantasy football scores. "She's late," Richard whispered, leaning in. "Do you think she's going to show?" Harrington didn't look up. "If she's smart, she won't. She has no counsel, no money, and no case. If she doesn't appear, we get a default judgment. You get everything. She gets a bill for my time." Richard smirked, glancing back at the gallery. Jessica was there, sitting in the third row. She was wearing a modest beige dress, a costume designed to make her look like a supportive colleague rather than the mistress who had wrecked a marriage. Around her neck, tucked discreetly under a scarf, but still visible to Richard, was the sterling sapphire. It was their little secret symbol of victory. 5 more minutes, and the judge will call it," Harrington muttered. "I have a tea time at 1. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. It wasn't a hesitant push. It was a synchronized opening. First came 2 young associates in matching gray suits, carrying heavy briefcases. They moved with the efficiency of a pit crew, setting up files at the empty defense table. They placed a pitcher of water, a stack of legal pads, and a single, pristine laptop. Harrington looked up, his brow furrowing. "Who are they? Legal aid doesn't have paralegals like that." Then, the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Walking through the doors was a man Richard had never seen before, but whose reputation preceded him by the terrifying silence that fell over the other lawyers in the room. He was elderly, bald, and moved with a slow, predatory grace. He wore a 3-piece suit that looked like it belonged in a 1920s boardroom. Arthur Harrington's phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the table. "My God," Harrington whispered, his face draining of color. "Who is it?" Richard hissed. "Arthur, who is that?" "That's Edward Blackwood," Harrington choked out. He doesn't do divorces. He defends multinational corporations against the government. He hasn't stepped inside a family court in 20 years. Blackwood didn't even look at the plaintiff's table. He took his seat at the defense table, opened a leather folio, and uncapped a fountain pen. "Why is he here?" Richard asked, a knot of panic forming in his stomach. "I don't know," Harrington said, wiping sweat from his upper lip. Maybe he's lost? Then, Alex walked in. Richard almost didn't recognize her. The woman who had worn oversized sweaters and messy buns for 10 years was gone. In her place was a woman who looked like she owned the building. She wore a cream-colored Alexander McQueen suit that fit her like armor. Her hair was sharp, her makeup flawless. She didn't look at Richard. She looked straight ahead, her chin held high. But it was the man walking beside her who made the entire courtroom gasp. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated a kind of power that made Richard feel instantly small. He had the same steel-gray eyes as Alex. He walked with a protective hand on her lower back. As he passed the gallery, a young law clerk in the back row whispered, loud enough to be heard, Is that Alexander Sterling?" Richard froze. He knew that name. Everyone in architecture knew that name. Sterling Dynamics owned half the skyline. They were the clients you dreamed of getting, the ones who could make or break a firm with a single contract. Alexander Sterling guided Alex to her chair, pulled it out for her, and then sat down in the front row of the gallery, directly behind her. He crossed his legs and fixed his eyes on Richard. It was a look of pure, unadulterated menace. "Arthur," Richard squeaked, "why is the CEO of Sterling Dynamics sitting behind my wife?" Harrington was frantically typing on his laptop. "I don't know, Richard. Maybe they're sleeping together?" "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison, a stern woman with a reputation for zero tolerance for drama, swept into the room. She took her seat and banged the gavel. "Docket number 4,592, Jenkins v. Jenkins," the judge announced. "Appearances?" Harrington stood up, his voice shaking slightly. "Arthur Harrington, for the petitioner, Richard Jenkins." Edward Blackwood stood up. He didn't rush. He buttoned his jacket slowly. "Edward Blackwood," he said, his voice booming like a cannon shot in the small room. Appearing for the respondent, Alex Sterling. The name hung in the air for a long, agonizing second. "Objection," Harrington blurted out instinctively. "Her name is Jenkins." "Not anymore," Blackwood said smoothly. "And frankly, Mr. Harrington, after today, I doubt she'll want to be associated with that name ever again." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. "Alex Sterling?" He looked at Alex. She finally turned to look at him. She didn't look sad. She didn't look angry. She looked at him the way a scientist looks at a bug under a microscope. The trap had been sprung. "Mr. Harrington," Judge Harrison said, peering over her glasses, "you filed an emergency motion to deny spousal support based on the respondent's alleged poverty and, let me see here, gross financial misconduct and embezzlement. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Harrington said, trying to regain his footing. He was a bully, and bullies crumbled when they weren't the biggest dog in the yard. "Mrs. Jenkins, excuse me. The respondent has no income. She has been draining the marital accounts. We believe she is a flight risk and a financial liability." "I see," the judge said. She turned to Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood, this is an unusual appearance for you. Does your client have a response to these serious allegations?" Blackwood walked to the center of the room. He didn't hold any papers. He spoke from memory. "Your Honor, the allegations are not only false, they are laughable. Mr. Harrington claims my client is destitute. I would like to submit into evidence Exhibit A." One of the young associates handed a document to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. "This is a certified statement of Alex Sterling's blind trust," Blackwood continued. "As of this morning, her liquid assets exceed $600 million. She is one of the primary shareholders of Sterling Dynamics. She hasn't asked for spousal support because she needs the money, Your Honor. She hasn't asked for it because she didn't want to embarrass her husband by revealing that she could buy his entire firm with the interest she earns in a single day." The judge's eyebrows shot up into her hairline. She looked at the document, then at Alex, then at Richard. "Mr. Jenkins," the judge said, her voice dripping with skepticism, "did you not know your wife was a Sterling?" Richard stammered, standing up. No. She said she was a barista. She was humble." Alex spoke for the first time. Her voice was clear and calm. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had. Clearly, that was a test you failed. Order, the judge said, though she didn't bang the gavel. She seemed to be enjoying this. Your Honor, Blackwood continued, regarding the embezzlement. Mr. Jenkins claims, my client stole $5,000. We admit she took nothing. However, since the petitioner raised the issue of financial honesty, we felt compelled to investigate the marital finances in full. Blackwood signaled. The associate dropped a heavy binder, at least 4 inches thick, onto the plaintiff's table with a loud thud. What is this? Harrington asked, staring at the binder like it was a bomb. That, Blackwood said, his voice turning hard, is a forensic audit of Richard Jenkins's accounts for the last 7 years. It details a systematic scheme of kickbacks, inflated invoices, and wire fraud conducted through his architecture firm. It appears Mr. Jenkins has been funding his lifestyle not by being a successful partner, but by stealing from his clients. Richard gripped the table. The room was spinning. That's a lie, Richard shouted. This is ambush. It's not an ambush. It's discovery, Blackwood snapped. And we found something else. Blackwood turned and pointed a long, bony finger directly at the gallery. Your Honor, I call your attention to the woman sitting in the 3rd row, Miss Jessica Vane. Jessica froze. Every head in the courtroom turned to her. She shrank into her seat, pulling her scarf tighter. Miss Vane is wearing a piece of jewelry that was reported stolen from the respondent's safe 3 weeks ago, Blackwood said. A vintage sapphire pendant, valued at $250,000. It is a Sterling family heirloom. Objection, Harrington shouted. This is speculation. Is it? Blackwood countered. We have the insurance appraisal photos. We have the police report. And if Miss Vane would be so kind as to remove her scarf, we can verify it right now. The judge stared at Jessica. Miss Vane, please stand up. Jessica stood, trembling. Remove the scarf, the judge ordered. Jessica's hands shook as she unwound the silk. The sapphire glinted under the harsh courtroom lights. The chip on the bottom left corner was visible even from a distance. Mr. Jenkins, the judge said, her voice ice cold, did you give that necklace to Miss Vane? Richard looked at Jessica. He looked at the binder of evidence that would send him to jail. He looked at Alexander Sterling, who was smiling a wolf's smile in the back row. Richard choked. I thought it was marital property. It is an heirloom, Alex said. It belonged to my great-grandmother, and you gave it to your mistress. The judge slammed the gavel down so hard, it echoed like a gunshot. Miss Vane, you will hand that necklace to the bailiff immediately. If you leave this courthouse with it, you will be arrested for possession of stolen goods. Jessica fumbled with the clasp, tears streaming down her face. She handed the necklace to the bailiff, who brought it to Alex. Alex took the necklace. She didn't put it on, she just held it tight. Now, the judge said, turning her fury on Richard. Mr. Jenkins, it seems you have wasted this court's time. You have filed frivolous motions, you have lied about assets, and you are apparently under investigation for serious financial crimes. Your Honor, I move to withdraw, Harrington shouted, standing up and backing away from Richard. I cannot represent a client who facilitates fraud. Motion granted, the judge said instantly. Get out of my courtroom, Mr. Harrington. Harrington grabbed his briefcase and sprinted out the door, leaving Richard alone at the table. Richard stood there, stripped of his lawyer, his dignity, and his future. He looked across the aisle at Alex. Alex, he whispered, his voice cracking. Please, we can talk about this. I'm your husband. Alex stood up. She looked tall, regal, and untouchable. No, Richard, she said softly. You're just a line item in my expense report, and I'm cutting the budget. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, we are countersuing for full dissolution of marriage, legal fees, and we will be turning over the evidence of his fraud to the district attorney. So ordered, the judge said. Court is adjourned. As the gavel hit, Alexander Sterling stood up and walked to the rail. He looked down at Richard, who was slumped in his chair, head in his hands. You told her to leave with nothing, Alexander said, his voice low and deep. Richard looked up, tears in his eyes. She's leaving with everything, Alexander said. And you? You get exactly what you paid for. Alexander offered his arm to his sister. Ready to go, Alex? I have a helicopter waiting. We have a board meeting in London at 6. I'm ready, Alex said. She walked out of the courtroom, the sapphire clutched in her hand, leaving Richard Jenkins alone in the silence of his own destruction. 6 months later, the New York winter had settled over the city like a heavy, wet blanket. It was that specific kind of February gray, the kind that seeped into your bones and refused to leave. On the corner of 5th Avenue and 42nd Street, the wind whipped through the scaffolding of a burst water main repair site. Standing there, shivering in a high-visibility neon vest that was 2 sizes too big, was a man who used to complain if his espresso was 2 degrees too cold. Richard Jenkins shifted his weight from one freezing foot to the other. His boots were cheap, bought from a discount bin in New Jersey, and they had absolutely no insulation against the slushy puddle he was currently standing in. He held a slow stop sign with hands that were chapped, raw, and devoid of the gold wedding band that had once sat on his finger. His fall from grace hadn't just been a stumble. It had been a complete terminal velocity impact. The forensic audit Edward Blackwood had unleashed in that courtroom didn't just dismantle his divorce case, it had nuked his entire existence. The partners at his architecture firm, terrified of the Sterling family's reach and the looming federal investigation, hadn't just fired him, they had erased him. They sued him for breach of contract, scrubbed his name from every project he'd ever touched, and left him to the wolves. Then came the district attorney. 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of grand larceny. He was currently out on bail, a freedom purchased by selling his Rolex and his car, awaiting a trial that promised to trade his Hamptons dreams for a federal prison cell. Jessica Vane? She had lasted exactly 48 hours after the courtroom humiliation. She packed her bags while Richard was still being processed at the precinct, leaving a note on the counter that simply said, "I don't do drama. Good luck." The last he heard, she was living in Greenwich with a hedge fund manager who was 20 years her senior. Richard's pocket buzzed. It wasn't the sleek, latest model iPhone he used to flaunt. It was a cracked, prepaid Android with a battery that died by noon. He ignored it. It was his landlord in Jersey City, asking for the rent on the basement studio that smelled permanently of mildew and boiled cabbage. "Hey, wake up, buddy," a foreman shouted from the hole in the ground. "Traffic's moving." Richard flinched, flipping the sign to slow and waving a line of luxury cars past. He watched them go, Mercedes, BMWs, Audis. He used to be in those cars. He used to be the one annoyed by the construction workers. Now, he was part of the scenery, invisible to the people he used to call peers. When his break finally came, Richard shuffled to the newsstand on the corner. He needed caffeine to survive the next 4 hours. He counted out the quarters in his pocket, just enough for a small, lukewarm coffee and a stale protein bar. As he waited for the cashier to ring him up, his eyes drifted aimlessly to the magazine rack. The glossy covers promised a world of glamour, wealth, and success, a world he had been exiled from. And then, his heart stopped. Staring back at him from the cover of Architectural Digest, the holy grail of his profession, the cover he had spent 10 years trying to get, was a face he knew better than his own. But it wasn't the Alex he remembered. It wasn't the Alex who wore oversized sweaters to hide herself. It wasn't the Alex who asked for permission to speak at dinner parties. The woman on the cover was a titan. She wore a black turtleneck that emphasized her sharp jawline. Her eyes, once soft and pleading, were now piercing, filled with an intelligence and power that terrified him. The headline screamed in bold, gold foil, "The Phoenix Rises." Alex Sterling, on reclaiming her name, her fortune, and the blueprint for a new era. Richard's hands shook violently as he reached out. He shouldn't look. He knew it would destroy whatever shred of sanity he had left, but he couldn't stop himself. He flipped to the center spread. The photos were breathtaking. Alex, standing in a sun-drenched studio in Soho, surrounded by models and sketches. Alex, laughing with her team. Alex, standing in front of a building that looked like it defied gravity, a structure of glass and timber that curved like a wave. The caption read, Alex Sterling, founder and principal architect of Sterling & Stone. Her debut project, the Sanctuary Library in Brooklyn, has just won the Pritzker Emerging Architect Prize. Richard felt the bile rise in his throat. The Sanctuary Library. He remembered that design. Years ago, late one night, Alex had shown him a sketch of a library that curved around existing trees rather than cutting them down. He remembered exactly what he had said to her. It's too sentimental, Alex. It's weak. Real architecture is about dominance, not hugging trees. Throw it away. She hadn't thrown it away. She had built it, and the world loved it. His eyes scanned the interview, desperate to find some mention of him, some acknowledgement of his influence. He found this, is greater than. For a long time, I thought I had to make myself small to fit into the negative space of someone else's life, Sterling says. I was told my vision was weak because it was compassionate, but I learned the hard way that a true partner doesn't ask you to shrink. He asks you to soar. I built this firm not with my family's money, though I am grateful for the safety net, but with the ideas I had suppressed for a decade. This success? This belongs to the Alex, who was told she was nothing. Nothing, Richard whispered. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. He had told her to leave with nothing, and in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift of all, the freedom to realize she was everything. Hey pal, you gonna buy that magazine? Or just drool on it? The cashier barked, snapping his gum. It's $12. $12. A trivial amount. The cost of a cocktail. The cost of a valet tip. Richard looked at the quarters in his hand. He had $4. No, Richard whispered, his voice cracking. He carefully placed the magazine back on the rack, smoothing out a wrinkle he had made on Alex's face. I can't afford it. He turned and walked back out into the freezing rain. He looked up at the skyline, at the Sterling Tower, piercing the clouds blocks away. High above, in the penthouse he would never see, the woman he had thrown away was ruling the world. He realized then that the tragedy wasn't that he lost the money. The tragedy was that he had held a diamond in his hand for 10 years, and because he was too busy looking at his own reflection, he had convinced himself it was just a piece of glass. Meanwhile, 60 stories above the slush and the grime, the air in the Sterling Dynamics Executive Lounge smelled of teak wood, leather, and victory. Alex stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city that was slowly lighting up as twilight fell. She held a glass of vintage scotch, the amber liquid catching the light. She wasn't looking down at the streets. She was looking at the horizon. The reviews are coming in from London and Tokyo, a deep voice said behind her. Alexander Sterling walked up, joining her at the window. He looked tired but proud. The critics are calling the library a masterclass in emotional architecture. Even the critics who usually hate us. They say it feels human. Alex took a sip, the warmth spreading through her chest. It feels real, Alex. For the first time in my life, I'm not Sterling's little sister, and I'm not